The blaring sound of the car alarm shattered the silence of the night. I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling as I struggled to unlock the front door. It had been 3 long weeks since I last walked through this threshold, 3 weeks of grueling business meetings and late-night negotiations. My mind was foggy with exhaustion, but nothing could have prepared me for the scene that awaited inside. As the door creaked open, I noticed an eerie stillness. The house was too quiet, a stark contrast to the bustling comfort I had left behind. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, the weight of fatigue lifting momentarily as a gnawing sense of unease settled in my chest. "Melly, are you here?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty hallway. The usual warmth of our home felt distant, replaced by a chilling tension. I slipped off my shoes and walked cautiously toward the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows on the walls. When I entered the living room, my breath caught in my throat. There, sprawled on our bed, was my wife, Melissa, and a man I didn't recognize. Their bodies were entwined, and their murmured words, sweet, intimate, cut through me like a knife. The shock paralyzed me, the scene unfolding as if in slow motion. Melissa's head rested on the man's chest, her eyes closed in contentment. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of the impossible scene. The man, clad in nothing but a disheveled shirt, looked up, his eyes wide with panic, as he realized we had been discovered. Melissa's face blanched, and she sprang from the bed, her expression shifting from shock to guilt. "James, I didn't expect you back so soon," she stammered, scrambling to cover herself with a sheet. Her voice wavered, betraying the fear that now colored her eyes. "James, I can explain," the man said, rising from the bed and hastily pulling on his clothes. His voice was thick with the kind of false confidence that only deepened my rage. Words eluded me. The betrayal was too raw, too jarring. My vision narrowed as my thoughts spiraled into a tumult of anger and disbelief. How long had this been going on? How could she do this to me? Questions bombarded my mind, but they remained unspoken as I struggled to find my voice. Melissa's attempt to bridge the gap between us with hurried explanations fell on deaf ears. I could barely hear her over the roaring storm within me. My marriage, 19 years of shared memories, hopes, and dreams, had been shattered in a single heart-wrenching moment. "I need you to leave," I said through gritted teeth, directing my fury at the stranger in my home. My voice was steady, but the underlying pain was evident. The man cast one last apologetic glance at Melissa before exiting the room. His departure left a heavy silence, one filled with the echoes of the life we once shared. Melissa's tears flowed freely now, and she moved toward me, her hands reaching out in a desperate attempt at reconciliation. "James, please," she pleaded. "It was a mistake. It meant nothing." I recoiled from her touch, the sting of her words cutting deeper than any physical wound. "A mistake? 19 years, Melissa. How could you?" The gravity of her betrayal seemed to weigh on her, but her attempts to justify or excuse her actions only fueled my anger. I needed answers, but more than that, I needed to understand how this had happened and why she had chosen to deceive me so thoroughly. "I'm going to need time," I said, my voice cold and firm. "I need to figure out what to do next, but right now, I need you to leave." Melissa's sobs grew louder as she gathered her clothes and fled the room, her exit marked by the slamming of the bedroom door. The sound echoed through the house, reverberating off the walls and magnifying the emptiness that now defined my home. I sank into a chair, my mind reeling from the revelation. How could I have missed the signs? Was there a way to salvage anything from this wreckage? My thoughts were interrupted by a low, insistent buzzing, the sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. With a heavy sigh, I picked it up and glanced at the screen. It was a message from an unknown number. My curiosity piqued, and I opened it. The text was short but chilling. "I know what happened. I can help you find the truth. Meet me tomorrow at noon. Jay." The message left me with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. The path ahead would be long and fraught with the painful quest for truth. As the darkness of the night enveloped the house, I realized that my journey had only just begun. The next morning the sun rose reluctantly, casting a weak light through the drawn curtains. I hadn't slept a wink. My mind replayed the previous night's events like a relentless, nightmarish loop. I got up early, my hands still shaking as I brewed a pot of coffee. Each clink of the coffee pot seemed to echo with the hollow remnants of my once happy life. I glanced at the clock. 11:30 a.m. It was time to meet the mysterious Jay. I dressed in a hurry, donning a simple button-up shirt and jeans. I felt oddly detached from my usual self, like I was wearing a mask that barely fit. I arrived at a quaint cafe downtown, its charming facade at odds with the turmoil inside me. I scanned the room and spotted a man sitting at a corner table, his face partially hidden by a newspaper. He looked up as I approached, his eyes sharp and calculating. "James?" he said, setting the newspaper aside. He was a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a rugged face that suggested years of experience. "I'm John. Thanks for meeting me." I took a seat across from him, my mind racing. "You texted me about knowing what happened last night. How do you know?" John's expression was inscrutable as he leaned in. "Let's just say I have sources. I specialize in cases like yours where betrayal is involved. I want to help you find the truth." "Why should I trust you?" I asked, my voice tinged with skepticism. "What's in it for you?" John's gaze was steady. "I get satisfaction from solving cases, from bringing clarity to people who are lost, and I think you need that right now." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "All right, what do you have?" John pulled out a manila envelope from his briefcase and slid it across the table. "I've done some preliminary digging. Inside you'll find photos and notes that might give you a clearer picture of what's been going on." I opened the envelope, my hands trembling slightly. Inside were several photographs, Melissa and Tom together at various locations, their expressions intimate and relaxed. There were also handwritten notes, filled with affection and plans for the future. "This is damning," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "But it's still just pieces of a puzzle. I need to know why she did this. Why Tom?" John nodded. "That's what we'll find out. I've already started looking into Tom's background. From what I've gathered, he's not just some random guy. He's someone who's been in and out of your wife's life for a while." I frowned. "How long has this been going on? I thought we had a good marriage." John's eyes softened with empathy. "It's often the case that people hide their true selves well. The signs might have been there, but sometimes we choose not to see them." A pang of guilt shot through me. I should have noticed something. I should have— "Don't blame yourself," John interrupted gently. "You're here now, and that's what matters. We'll figure this out together." I nodded, my resolve hardening. "All right, what's the next step?" John leaned back in his chair. "I'll need to do more digging into Tom's past and any other potential connections Melissa might have had. In the meantime, you should try to gather any information or suspicions you might have about her activities." "Like what?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed. "Anything unusual?" John replied. "Look for changes in her routine, friends she might have mentioned, places she's been, anything that might give us a clue." "Okay," I said, feeling a mix of determination and dread. "I'll start looking into it." John stood up, preparing to leave. "I'll be in touch soon. Try not to do anything drastic. We need to approach this methodically." As I watched him leave, I felt a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. Maybe, just maybe, I could find the answers I needed and regain control over the shattered remnants of my life. I left the cafe with the manila envelope clutched tightly in my hand. The photographs and notes felt like a heavy burden, but also a necessary part of the journey I was about to undertake. I knew the road ahead would be fraught with pain and difficult truths, but I was resolved to uncover every secret and piece together the fragments of my fractured world. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across my living room as I pored over the contents of John's manila envelope. The photographs and notes lay scattered on the coffee table, each one a painful reminder of Melissa's betrayal. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my thoughts. This was not just about confronting Melissa. It was about understanding the full extent of the deception. My phone buzzed, jolting me from my reverie. It was a text from John. "I've got some initial findings on Tom. Meet me at the office in an hour." I checked the time, 3 p.m. I quickly gathered the photographs and notes, slipping them into a folder. The weight of my emotions felt almost tangible as I left the house and headed to John's office. John's office was a modest but well-organized space, filled with files, old case notes, and a large corkboard cluttered with pins and photographs. John greeted me with a nod as I entered, gesturing for me to sit. "I've been busy," he said, his tone businesslike. I've looked into Tom's background and found some interesting connections. I sat down feeling a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. What did you find? John handed me a file. Tom Harding, 43 years old. He's been moving around a lot. His most recent address is in a neighborhood not far from yours. I skimmed through the file. He's a freelancer. No steady job, but he's been involved in various short-term projects. Seems like he's always on the move. Exactly, John said. But there's something else. I found out that he's had a string of failed relationships and a history of being in and out of people's lives. He's also been seen frequently at a certain cafe near your wife's workplace. A cafe? I asked, my curiosity piqued. John nodded. It's not just any cafe. It's a place that caters to a more exclusive crowd. Tom seems to frequent it often, and I've learned that Melissa has been there multiple times in the past few months. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. So she's been seeing him there, but why? John tapped his fingers on the desk, deep in thought. That's what we need to find out. There might be more to this than just an affair. I suggest you check out that cafe yourself. Maybe you'll find something that can give us more insight into their relationship. I nodded, determined. I'll go there today. What about Tom's connections? Anything else? John shook his head. Not yet. I'll keep digging. But for now, focus on the cafe. See if you can spot anything or anyone unusual. I left John's office feeling a surge of purpose. The idea of confronting Melissa's betrayal in the very place where it may have been nurtured was both daunting and necessary. The cafe was a charming upscale establishment with a modern yet cozy interior. As I entered, the smell of freshly brewed coffee and pastries filled the air. I scanned the room, looking for any sign of Tom or Melissa. I noticed a corner table where a couple sat, their conversation hushed and intimate. The man seemed familiar, though I couldn't be certain it was Tom. I ordered a coffee and took a seat, trying to blend in as inconspicuously as possible. As I sipped my coffee, I overheard snippets of conversation from nearby tables. Most of it was mundane chatter, but one conversation caught my attention. A woman was talking about a recent development with someone named Mel, mentioning how she was always there with that guy. My ears perked up. I couldn't make out the entire conversation, but it was clear that Melissa's visits to this cafe were well known among some of the patrons. I made a mental note to check if any of them might have seen her with Tom. I spent the next hour observing the cafe, taking note of the clientele and their interactions. The place seemed to be a hub for local professionals and a few affluent individuals. I couldn't spot Tom, but I noticed that the staff appeared to be friendly with the regulars, which might prove useful later. I decided to head back home, feeling both frustrated and hopeful. As I left the cafe, I noticed a familiar face, a young woman who had been at the cafe earlier in the day. She was walking in the same direction as me. "Excuse me," I called out, catching up to her. "I couldn't help but overhear some of your conversation in the cafe. I'm looking for information about someone who frequents that place." She looked at me with curiosity. "You mean Tom? He's always with Mel. They're quite the pair." "Mel? You mean Melissa?" I asked, my heart racing. She nodded. "Yeah, that's her name. They're regulars there, and I've seen them together several times. If you're looking for more information, you might want to talk to the barista. She's been there for years and knows everyone." I thanked her and made a mental note. As I walked away, I realized that the puzzle was slowly coming together, piece by piece. The cafe, the connections, and the conversations were all leading me closer to the truth. Back home, I reviewed the notes and photographs again, piecing together the fragments of Melissa's secret life. It was clear that this journey would not only reveal the depth of her betrayal, but also challenge me in ways I had never imagined. The road ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but I was determined to uncover every truth, no matter how painful. The next morning, I felt a knot of anticipation tightening in my chest. My visit to the cafe had provided a few clues, but now it was time to follow up on the barista's suggestion. I needed to talk to the staff and get more concrete information about Melissa's activities. I arrived at the cafe just after it opened, the early hour offering a quieter atmosphere. The sun filtered gently through the large windows, casting a warm glow over the polished wooden tables and soft chairs. The cafe was still setting up for the day, and a young barista was busy preparing the coffee machine. "Excuse me," I said as I approached the counter. "I was hoping you could help me. I'm looking for some information about a couple of your regulars. The barista, a young woman with bright blue eyes and a friendly demeanor, looked up. Sure, I can try. What's their names? I hesitated for a moment. Melissa and Tom. I understand they come here quite often. Her expression shifted to one of recognition. Oh, I know them. They're regulars, but I haven't seen them here recently. They used to come in all the time, usually in the afternoons. Do you know anything about their relationship? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. The barista shrugged. Not much. They were always very private, but they seemed close. I don't know if there's anything more to it. I noticed a framed photo on the wall behind her, a group shot of the cafe staff. Is there anyone who's been working here longer? Maybe someone who might know more about them? The barista nodded. Yeah, Jenna. She's been with us for a while. She might have more information. I can ask her to come over. A few minutes later, Jenna, a woman in her early 30s with a warm smile and a no-nonsense attitude, walked into the cafe. She greeted me with a curious glance. Hi, I'm Jenna. I hear you're asking about Melissa and Tom, she said. Yes, I replied. I'm trying to understand more about their relationship. Anything you can tell me would be helpful. Jenna sighed and glanced around to ensure no one was within earshot. Well, Melissa and Tom were regulars here for a few months. They were always very close, but I didn't know them personally. I did overhear some conversations, though. Such as? I prompted. They talked a lot about trips and plans, Jenna said. It seemed like they were very serious about each other. Melissa always seemed excited whenever she talked about him. Did you ever notice anything unusual? I asked, feeling a growing urgency. Jenna thought for a moment. There was one thing. Melissa seemed to be particularly secretive about her phone. She would often step outside to take calls, and she was always very guarded about who she was meeting. Interesting, I said, making a note. Did you see them argue or have any disagreements? Not that I can recall, Jenna replied. They were always quite affectionate and seemed happy, but I did notice Tom was often in and out of the cafe, sometimes without Melissa. Thank you for your time, I said, feeling a mixture of gratitude and frustration. If you remember anything else, please let me know. Jenna nodded. Will do. As I left the cafe, I felt a surge of frustration mixed with hope. Melissa and Tom's relationship seemed more complex than I had initially thought. The secrecy, the frequent visits, and the private phone calls all painted a picture of a clandestine affair. I decided to visit Tom's last known address. The neighborhood was a modest area on the outskirts of town, characterized by small houses and neatly trimmed lawns. I parked in front of Tom's house, a modest single-story home with a well-kept garden, and approached the door. I knocked, and after a few moments, a woman in her mid-40s answered. She looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Can I help you? She asked. I'm looking for Tom Harding, I said. I understand he used to live here. The woman's expression darkened. Tom doesn't live here anymore. Moved out about a month ago. Do you know where he went? I pressed. She shook her head. Sorry, I don't. He didn't leave a forwarding address. Did he leave any contact information? I asked, feeling a sense of urgency. No, she said, crossing her arms. He was always very private. I don't have any way to contact him. Thanks anyway, I said, turning to leave. As I walked back to my car, I felt a pang of frustration. Tom's disappearance added another layer of complexity to the investigation. I returned home and reviewed the information I'd gathered. The cafe staff's insights, Tom's elusive behavior, and the growing sense of secrecy all pointed to a deeper, more intricate web of deceit. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the full picture remained frustratingly out of reach. I picked up my phone and dialed John's number. Hey John, I've got some new information. We need to talk. Great, John's voice came through, calm and reassuring. Let's meet at the office later. We'll go over everything and figure out the next steps. As I hung up, I felt a renewed sense of determination. The journey was far from over, and each piece of information brought me one step closer to uncovering the full truth behind Melissa's betrayal. The office was quiet when I arrived. John was already there, poring over a stack of documents at his desk. His face looked tense, his brow furrowed in concentration. As I walked in, he looked up and gestured for me to take a seat. Morning, John said, setting the papers aside. How did the follow-up go? Not great, I replied, sitting down. I spoke to the barista and Jenna at the cafe. They confirmed Melissa and Tom were frequent visitors, but there were no clear red flags. Jenna mentioned that Melissa was very secretive about her phone and often took calls outside. John nodded, taking notes. Interesting. What about Tom's last known address? He moved out about a month ago, I said. The current resident didn't have any forwarding information for him. John's expression grew thoughtful. It seems Tom is deliberately avoiding any trace. This could indicate he's either hiding something or has been instructed to stay out of sight. Maybe, I said, feeling a mix of frustration and curiosity. What do you suggest we do next? John leaned back in his chair. We need to dig deeper into Tom's past. If he's been moving around, there might be records or people who've encountered him. Also, we should investigate any recent contacts Melissa might have made. Okay, where should we start? I asked. I'll look into Tom's previous addresses and contacts, John said. In the meantime, see if you can gather more information about Melissa's recent activities. Check her phone records if you can. I nodded, feeling the weight of the task ahead. I'll start with her phone records. I might need to get access to her phone, though. John raised an eyebrow. That might be tricky. If you can't get direct access, consider looking through her belongings for any clues. Even a small detail could be significant. With a plan in mind, I returned home and set about searching Melissa's belongings. Her phone was locked with a passcode, so accessing it directly was not an option. I began by examining her desk, where she kept a stack of personal items. Among the papers and knickknacks, I found a small notebook. Flipping through its pages, I discovered a few entries that caught my eye. They seemed innocuous at first. A list of appointments, reminders about family events. But then I saw something unusual. Several entries marked with cryptic symbols and names. One entry stood out. Meeting with D at the park, 3 p.m. The date was recent. D could be a person of interest, and the park location was noted as a rendezvous point. I made a note of the details and decided to check out the park. The park was a sprawling green space with winding paths and a playground. It was a popular spot for families and joggers. I arrived early and found a quiet spot to observe. My eyes scanned the area, looking for anyone who might seem out of place. At precisely 3 p.m., a man approached the designated meeting spot. He was tall, with dark hair and a casual demeanor. I watched as he sat down on a bench, looking around with an air of expectation. My heart raced. Could this be D? I needed to find out. I approached the man casually, pretending to be a jogger taking a break. Nice day, isn't it? I said, taking a seat on the adjacent bench. The man glanced at me briefly but didn't respond. I watched as he took out a phone and began scrolling through it. After a few minutes, a woman arrived, Melissa. Melissa greeted the man with a warm hug, clearly familiar with him. They sat together on the bench, engaged in an animated conversation. I couldn't hear the details, but their body language was intimate. I took out my phone and discreetly captured a few photos of them together. After about 20 minutes, Melissa and the man parted ways, exchanging a quick, affectionate kiss before heading off in different directions. My heart pounded as I reviewed the photos I'd taken. This man was someone significant in Melissa's life. I headed back to John's office with the new information. John greeted me with a look of curiosity as I handed him the photos. Looks like you found something, he said, examining the images. So, who's this guy? I don't know yet, I said, but Melissa was meeting him at the park. I've got to find out more about him. John took a deep breath. All right, I'll dig into any public records or connections this guy might have. You should focus on trying to get more information from Melissa's phone if you can. Got it, I said, feeling a renewed sense of determination. I'll see if I can find any clues in her belongings or her recent messages. As I left John's office, I felt a surge of energy. Each new piece of information brought me closer to understanding the full extent of Melissa's betrayal. The park meeting and the mystery man were significant leads, but there was still much to uncover. Back at home, I continued my search through Melissa's belongings. I found a few more clues: old receipts, travel brochures, and even a diary. The diary entries were mostly mundane, but one entry caught my eye. Meeting with D went well. He's promised to help me with the project. The name D was becoming increasingly significant. I needed to find out who this person was and what their connection to Melissa involved. The diary also mentioned several trips and meetings in vague terms, hinting at ongoing plans. I felt a growing sense of urgency. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but the full picture remained obscured. I needed to confront Melissa with what I knew but I also needed to be prepared for the truth, whatever it might be. As I prepared for the next steps in my investigation, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the brink of uncovering something profoundly disturbing. The journey was far from over, and the path ahead was uncertain, but I was determined to follow it wherever it led. The afternoon sun was sinking low when I arrived back at the house. The revelation of Melissa's secret meeting and the cryptic entries in her diary weighed heavily on my mind. I felt a mix of dread and resolve as I prepared for what was to come. I walked into the house, my eyes scanning the familiar surroundings that had once been a sanctuary. Everything seemed eerily normal, yet the weight of the betrayal hung over everything. I decided to start by examining Melissa's phone records. She had left her phone on the kitchen counter when she went out, likely thinking nothing of it. I approached the counter, trying to remain calm as I picked up her phone. I needed her passcode to access it, and it was unlikely she would have used something obvious. I tried a few common codes, our anniversary, her birthday, without success. Frustration gnawed at me. Then it struck me, a code she might have used based on something meaningful to her. I hesitated, then tried a sequence related to our children's birth dates. It worked. I sighed in relief as the phone unlocked. I began by examining her call logs and text messages. There were a few missed calls from an unknown number, as well as several texts that seemed to have been deleted. I looked for anything that might give me a clue about her relationship with the man from the park. One text stood out. "I'll see you at 3 p.m. at the usual spot. Can't wait to discuss our plans. D." The message was recent, confirming the meeting I had observed. The sender's initial matched the mystery man I had seen with Melissa. I felt a surge of anger and determination. I needed to find out who this D was and what their plans involved. I also realized that I couldn't keep this information to myself any longer. Melissa needed to be confronted, but I wanted to do it in a way that would force her to reveal the truth. I put the phone back where I found it and decided to prepare for the confrontation. I knew Melissa would be home soon, and I had to be ready. As I waited, I went over everything in my mind. The cafe, the park meetings, the cryptic diary entries. Each piece was a thread in the web of deceit that Melissa had spun. I was determined to pull at each thread until the entire truth was laid bare. The door creaked open, and I heard Melissa's footsteps approaching. I took a deep breath and prepared myself. The confrontation would be difficult, but it was necessary. I wanted her to face the full extent of her actions and the impact they had on our family. Melissa walked into the living room, her face lighting up as she saw me. "Hey, I didn't expect you to be home early," she said, her tone cheerful. I forced a smile, trying to keep my emotions in check. "I'm not sure you're going to like what I have to say." Her expression shifted to concern. "What's wrong?" "I've been doing some digging," I said, my voice steady but firm. "And I found out a lot about what's been going on." Melissa's eyes widened, and she took a step back. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out the photographs from the park and the text messages from her phone. "I know about your meetings with Tom. I've seen the messages, and I know you've been meeting someone named D." Her face turned pale, and she looked at me with a mixture of fear and guilt. "James, please, let's talk about this." "Talk?" I said, feeling a surge of anger. "You've been hiding things from me for months, maybe even years. I deserve to know the truth." Melissa sat down on the couch, her shoulders slumping. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you." "Then why did you?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why did you betray me like this?" She looked at me with tear-filled eyes. "It started as something innocent. I was feeling lonely and disconnected, and Tom was there for me. It just spiraled out of control." I could see the anguish in her eyes, but it did little to ease the pain I felt. "And D? Who is he? What's this project you were working on?" Melissa hesitated, her eyes darting around the room. "D is a business contact. We were working on a project together, but it became more personal. I didn't want to involve you, and I didn't want to be caught in lies." "Caught in lies?" I repeated. "You were caught in a web of deceit that affected our entire family. You didn't just make a mistake, you betrayed our marriage." Melissa began to cry, her shoulders shaking. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to get out of it. I was scared and confused, and I didn't know how to fix things." I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. "What's done is done, Melissa. The trust is broken, and the damage is severe. I need to figure out how to move forward from here. As Melissa continued to cry, I realized that the confrontation had only scratched the surface. There was still much more to uncover about her relationship with Tom and the mysterious Dee. But for now, I needed to process the pain and start thinking about the next steps in dealing with this shattered trust. I stood up, feeling emotionally drained. I need some time to think. We'll talk more about this later. Melissa nodded, her face streaked with tears. I understand. I left the room, my mind swirling with thoughts and emotions. The confrontation had brought some clarity, but the road ahead was still fraught with uncertainty. The next steps were crucial, and I needed to approach them with caution and resolve. The night fell heavy and silent, the house enveloped in an uneasy quiet. I lay in bed, my mind racing through the revelations of the day. The confrontation with Melissa had been a torrent of emotions: anger, sadness, and a deep sense of betrayal. Yet amid the chaos, I knew I had to find a way to rebuild or to let go and move forward. The next morning, I made a decision. I needed to meet John and lay out the entire situation, including the new information about Melissa's relationship with Tom and the mysterious Dee. I hoped John's expertise could provide clarity on the next steps. I arrived at John's office just after 10 a.m., my thoughts preoccupied with the revelations from the previous day. John greeted me with a nod as I entered. "Morning," John said. "How did things go after your talk with Melissa?" "It was as expected," I replied. "She confessed to the affair and explained that Tom was someone she became emotionally involved with. But the extent of her involvement with Dee was still unclear." John leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "All right, let's review what we have. The key now is to determine Dee's role and figure out how it ties into everything." I handed John the photos of Melissa and Tom, along with the text messages I'd found. "This is the latest I have. Melissa seemed to be deeply involved with Tom, and Dee was mentioned in her diary and text messages." John reviewed the documents carefully. "It's clear that Melissa's relationship with Tom was more than just a casual affair. The involvement of Dee suggests there may be a business or financial motive behind it, especially given her references to projects and plans." "So what's our next move?" I asked, feeling a renewed sense of urgency. "We need to uncover more about Dee and the nature of the project they were involved in," John said. "I'll look into any business dealings or financial records related to Melissa. In the meantime, you should try to gather more information about Tom and Dee from other sources if possible." "I'll do that," I said. "But I also need to figure out how to handle things with Melissa. The trust is broken, and I need to decide if there's a way forward or if it's time to move on." John nodded sympathetically. "It's a difficult decision. Take your time to think it through. Once we have more information, you'll be in a better position to make an informed choice." With a plan in place, I left John's office feeling a mix of resolve and apprehension. I was determined to uncover the full truth, but the emotional weight of the situation was considerable. Over the next few days, I focused on gathering more information. I spoke to Melissa's colleagues and contacts, trying to piece together any clues about Dee and the mysterious project. It was a grueling process, but I was driven by the need for answers. Eventually, I learned that Dee was David Archer, a financial consultant with a reputation for handling high-stakes projects. David's involvement with Melissa appeared to be both personal and professional. The project they were working on was a significant business deal that had the potential to impact both of their careers. Armed with this information, I confronted Melissa once again. We sat down together, and I laid out everything I had discovered about David Archer and the nature of their project. "Melissa," I began, my voice steady but filled with a mix of pain and determination. "I've learned about David Archer and the business deal you were involved in. I understand that it was more than just an affair. It was tied to significant financial and personal stakes." Melissa looked down, her face pale. "Yes, that's true. David was an important part of a business venture that I was deeply involved in. The affair started as a way to escape the pressure of the deal and my feelings of isolation, but I never meant for it to hurt you this way. I need to understand why you kept it all a secret," I said, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Why didn't you come to me with the truth?" Melissa's eyes were filled with tears. "I was ashamed. I didn't want to admit to my mistakes, and I thought I could handle it on my own. But I see now that I made a terrible mistake by keeping everything hidden. I appreciate your honesty, I said, feeling a sense of resolution. But the trust between us has been shattered. I need to think about what's best for both of us moving forward. Melissa nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I understand. I'm so sorry for everything. After our conversation, I took some time to reflect on the situation. The betrayal was profound, but understanding the full context of Melissa's actions helped me gain some clarity. I realized that while the trust was damaged, the path forward would be guided by honesty and healing. In the end, Melissa and I decided to seek counseling together. We both acknowledged that the road to rebuilding trust would be long and challenging, but we were willing to try. It was a difficult decision, but it was made with the hope of finding a way to move forward, whether together or apart. As for the investigation, John's work revealed that David Archer's involvement was primarily business-oriented. The personal aspect of the affair had complicated matters, but it was clear that Melissa's actions were driven by a combination of personal and professional pressures. The journey had been one of discovery, not only about the people involved but also about myself. I learned that facing the truth, no matter how painful, was the first step towards healing. And while the future remained uncertain, I knew that I had the strength to navigate whatever came next. The story of betrayal and deceit had reached a resolution, but the lessons learned and the path to recovery were ongoing. In the end, it was a journey of confronting the past, understanding the present, and cautiously stepping into a future that promised both challenges and hope.